If two teaching methods both work, the next question is which one gets the learner there with fewer trials, less time, and better practical value? Seven is asking you to measure how efficiently behavior change happens. The text explains that practitioners need measurement to know whether and when behavior changed. The extent and duration of behavior change, the stability or variability of behavior before, during, and after treatment, and whether important changes occurred in other settings or situations. Measurement during treatment supports database decisions about continuing, changing, or ending treatment. Cooper also explains that measurement helps practitioners optimize effectiveness, and to be optimally effective, a practitioner must maximize behavior change efficiency in terms of time and resources. So efficiency is not just did it work, it is how much did it take to make it work. For this subsection, the strongest Cooper-based examples are trials to criterion, minutes of instruction needed to reach criterion, and cost-benefit ratios related to proposed interventions. On the exam, listen for phrases like fewer trials, less time, resources, cost, criterion, and which method is more efficient. Trials to criterion is a measure of the number of response opportunities needed to achieve a predetermined level of performance. A predetermined level of performance means the mastery level is set before judging whether the learner met the goal. What counts as a trial depends on the nature of the target behavior, relevant setting, and variables and antecedent stimuli and desired performance level. For a skill like shoe tying, each opportunity to tie a shoe could be counted as a trial. Trials to criterion data could then be reported as number of trials required for the learner to tie a shoe correctly without prompts or assistance. In simple language, trials to criterion asks how many learning chances did it take to reach the goal. Lower trials to criterion can show that one instructional method helped the learner reach the same criterion with fewer response opportunities. On the exam, when you see how many trials until mastery, think trials to criterion. Before you measure trials to criterion, define what one trial means. The text explains that for behaviors involving problem solving or discriminations that must be applied across many examples, a trial might be a block or a series of response opportunities. For example, a trial for discriminating between short and long vowel sounds of the letter O could be a block of 10 consecutive opportunities to respond. In that example, each opportunity presents a different word containing the letter O with short vowel and long vowel examples presented in random order. The trials to criterion data could be reported as the number of 10 trial blocks required for the learner to pronounce the O sound correctly in all words. This is important because two people could both say trials to criterion but count totally different units unless the trial is defined. The measurement must match the skill, the materials, the antecedent stimuli, and the performance goal. Trials to criterion is not disconnected from the measurement system. The text explains that count can be the basic measure from which trials to criterion data are derived. In other words, you may count the number of trials blocks or practice opportunities needed before the learner reaches the criterion. Cooper also explains that behavior analysts can use other basic measures as trials to criterion data, including rate, duration, and latency. For example, a trials to criterion measure for two-digit subtraction with borrowing could be the number of practice sheets the learner completes before solving all 20 problems in one sheet in 3 minutes or less. That example combines opportunities, accuracy, and time. So do not think trials to criterion always means one tiny discrete trial at a table. The key is that the learner reaches a predetermined performance standard and you measure what it took to get there. For C7, cost could be understood through the wording the text actually uses. Trials to criterion data are often calculated and reported after the fact as one important aspect of the cost of treatment or instructional method. The example given is a study that reported the number of instructional trials needed by 3 students with visual impairments and developmental disabilities to prepare 3 recipes without assistance on 2 consecutive times over 2 sessions. Each recipe included 10 to 21 task analyzed steps. The text also says trials to criterion data are sometimes supplemented by information on the number of minutes of instruction needed to reach predetermined performance criteria. So for exam purposes, cost can include the number of instructional trials and the number of instructional minutes needed to reach the same performance criterion. The text also connects efficiency to time and resources when discussing practitioner effectiveness. Training duration fits C7. When you measure how much instruction time was needed to reach a performance criterion, the text states that trials or criterion that are sometimes supplemented by the number of minutes of instruction needed to reach predetermined performance criteria. That matters because two teaching methods could require the same number of trials but very different amounts of teaching time. Cooper also says practitioners must maximize behavior change efficiency in terms of time and resources. So if one procedure reaches the same criterion in fewer minutes of instruction, that is relevant to efficiency. In practice, the data sheet might include date, target, method, number of instructional trials, minutes of instruction, and whether the criterion was met. The key exam phrase is minutes of instruction needed to reach criterion. That phrase points directly to training duration as an efficiency measure. Trials to criterion data are frequently used to compare the relative efficiency of two or more treatments or instructional methods. The text gives an example of comparing the number of practice trials needed for a student to master weekly spelling words practice in two different ways. A teacher could use those data to determine whether the student learns spelling words more efficiently with one method than another. The cleanest comparison keeps the target and criterion the same while comparing how many trials or how many minutes each method required. The text logic is simple. If the outcome is the same, the method requiring fewer opportunities or fewer instructional minutes may be more efficient. But the comparison needs measurement, not opinion. Direct and frequent measurement helps practitioners detect successes and failures so they can adjust treatment instead of relying on subjective judgment. Trials to criterion can be collected and analyzed as a dependent variable throughout a study. A dependent variable is the measured behavior or outcome that is tracked to see whether it changes. For example, teaching the concept red could involve presenting red and not red items and differentially reinforcing correct responses. The data could show how many exemplars were required before the child reached a specified performance level with discrimination. If the child reaches mastery of each newly introduced color in fewer instructional trials than previous colors, Cooper says this might be evidence of increasing agility in learning color concepts. Cost-benefit analysis appears in the text as part of asking what is worth doing. Questions about what is worth doing address the goals of practice and the impact of the strategies used to pursue those goals. The answers are typically based on evaluation of existing exigencies, the need for intervention, and an analysis of social validity and cost-benefit ratios related to the proposed intervention. Social validity asks whether the goals of the planned intervention are acceptable, whether the procedures are acceptable and aligned with best treatment practices, and whether the results show meaningful, significant, and sustainable change. For C7 cost-benefit analysis, it also connects to whether the goal, procedure, outcome, effort, and resource use makes sense for the child and context. The text does not provide a step-by-step cost-benefit formula in the measurement chapter. It does explicitly connect proposed interventions to social validity and cost-benefit ratios. Here's the final sorting rule for C7. Trials to criterion tells you the number of response opportunities needed to reach a predetermined performance level. Training duration can be measured by adding the number of minutes of instruction needed to reach predetermined performance criteria. Efficiency comparisons use those data to compare two or more treatments or instructional methods. Measurement helps practitioners maximize behavior change efficiency in terms of time and resources. Cost-benefit ratios are part of evaluating proposed interventions when asking what is worth doing. Social validity also matters because the text asks whether goals are acceptable, procedures are acceptable, and results are meaningful, significant, and suitable. On the exam, match the phrase to the measure. Number of trials to mastery means trials to criterion. Minutes to mastery means training duration, and worth the resources and impact points to cost benefit and social validity. So let's recap. For C7, trials to criterion measures the number of response opportunities needed to reach a predetermined performance level, and training duration can be measured as minutes of instruction needed to reach that criterion. Efficiency also connects to time, resources, and cost-benefit ratios when comparing instructional methods or evaluating whether a proposed intervention is worth doing.